Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of Severance Season 2, Episode 5, Trojan's Horse. Now, this episode, we actually see the worker that Felicia from O&D, who told Irving, is the one now that comes and collects from them these shipments to bring to the export hall. Now, what I thought was so fascinating about this is now I'm in this theory that Irv has actually been reset before. So when we first see him in Severance, that Irv has been through this Severance process before and started it again, and that's why his Outie is painting these paintings of the export hall, that he's seen the export hall, and that he was somehow a part of this change where they decided to not let regular people even near it. So I really think it's interesting that now they're finally showing this guy who is the one who is moving between the export hall and O&D, and he's getting this dental equipment. So I'm assuming that's used for people like Gemma. I don't know why there's dental equipment, if they're adjusting dead people's teeth to look straighter, to have them reprogrammed, who really knows? But he's whistling The Wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot, and that song is about a ship with the same name sinking in Lake Superior. And we've seen the Great Lakes are part of the show. We see in the painting of Kier looking over the lakes, and we see in the opening credits that there's a car, which I've been saying since the beginning is definitely Gemma's car, that went into the water. I wonder if her car actually went into one of the Great Lakes and that they had actually kidnapped her body here and brought it into Lumen. So I think there's a lot of things connecting there. I also thought it was absolutely crazy that if you really pay attention, when we see this man walking back to the exports hall, from the close-up shot from behind his head, he's moving his head like a goat would move their head. It's not like a human just whistling would move their head. It starts as that, and then the quick movements that go between are giving us a hint that we've seen even hinted at in the opening credits, where they show Mark's face, then it turns into a goat, that they're using some type of the goat's brain and putting in maybe at the beginning of certain people on this floor's bodies. So I wonder if this guy's got a little bit of goat brain. I don't know what is going on, but it's wild and it makes me very excited. Now we're back with Outie Mark, and he's taking these multicolored pills, which I'm assuming he got from Ragabi, and is supposed to help with the reintegration process. And why I'm assuming he got these from Ragabi, because then we see him take this liquid he drinks out of the fridge. Like, it's one of the most recent times he started taking this stuff because of how disgusted he is. It wouldn't be from Lumen because he would have been used to it by now. And we actually see that disgusting liquid in the opening credits. We see when his character of Mark is face down, his head on the table, there's spilt bottles of that liquid, which I don't think is a good sign. There's something off about this whole thing going on with Ragabi, and how much can we trust this process that she's only used once on Petey that really backfired. Now we see he's talking to Devin on the phone. He says, my innie fell off a rope apparently and just got a little wet. This is obviously a red flag to Devin. She's like, what are they doing to you guys? They're pulling the same BS. And we're also learning as an audience it was a weekend retreat. But he's not telling Devin about the reintegration, which is huge. And you know she would be very cautious about doing something so drastic and dangerous. And this is the Outie Mark being a depressed person, not thinking straight. And like I've mentioned, that Ben Stiller mentioned in the recap podcast in season 1 recaps, that he was saying that the North Star of the show is always about how lonely this guy Mark is and the decisions he makes. And we're seeing that theme really hit at the end of this episode, and why I really like this episode, because it's starting here, but that final shot of Adam Scott's face, which we'll get to at the end, which I thought was amazing. Now, Ragabi's actually moving basically into his basement because she thinks people might be watching. Of course, Lumen's watching, so it's a smart move. But you see Mark wants to speed up this reintegration process because it's a slow process she's taking with him compared to Petey. She's being cautious. And she's like, you know what? You're not remembering anything right now, but maybe your innie is, which is true. We saw that last episode when he remembered Gemma there for a second when he was sleeping with Helena. In this episode, again, we'll see it later on when Innie Mark is at his desk. He looks at the photo of the group photo, and it actually flips off and becomes the pills he took in this scene this morning. Now we'll get to see what happened with Helena, and she's with Drummond and Natalie. This seems a little confusing to me. I've watched it 3 times, and she says she thinks her father should hear about what happened from her, but they think it's best not to tell him about this. But later on, he says that it's the father who encouraged having Innie Helly go back in there. So does he know about that something went wrong at this retreat, but doesn't know the details of it, that she was almost killed? Is that the difference? It didn't really make that clear of what the father actually knows, if they're hiding from him her almost dying. But he knows something to encourage a change, right? Now Drummond says the medical team says your tempers should rebalance soon, which is the big part of Lumen that goes to Kier Egan and those tempers, and how they're trying to get everyone on a certain wavelength like Kier. And he says there will be residual trauma, which is going to be important for this character of Helena and how she handles that. And he suggests maybe she goes to another obligement session, whatever that is. I'm guessing that's like the wellness check version for the people who work at Lumen. But they reaffirmed to her how close they are to Cold Harbor being complete and why they want Heli back down there, because Mark will not do this job without a heli. And you see how she responds to any heli going down there. She's like, my any that tried to kill me, and then the other one that tried to kill me, talking about Irv. She's like, they're effing animals. Now you'll see this show, if you've ever seen The Handmaid's Tale, it's a lot like that in the sense of our characters who are our enemies in this type of story, where they all have a little gray, and that you have moments like, especially Milchick in this episode, where you think like, oh, they're going to turn a little. And same with Helena last episode when she's talking about she's ashamed of her Outie. But that doesn't just happen overnight. And I think the tragedy of it is a lot of people like that go back to their old ways, especially when they're pushed against the wall. And I think that's what's going to happen with characters like Helena, Cobell, and Milchick. I thought it was interesting in a big reveal later on in the episode that we learned that Helena is the leader in waiting of this company, which is huge information, and that it kind of might explain now why she went down into Severance in the beginning. When we see her on the table, why did Helena agree to do this? It might be a step to becoming a leader in the company. And like that story Milchick will talk about later on about the king who went on to study his subjects, I don't think it was the reason she originally went down. I think there is something, though, in their handbook that is part of that you're supposed to experience what the people you're about to run and what they do on a day-to-day basis. Now, I love we get to see Heliar back in the severed floor for the first time this season. Just her reaction to Miss Wong was great. Like, who the F are you? And this is just a kid in front of her. She has no idea who this person is. Poor Heliar has just been through the ringer here with everything she's waking up to. And you see now, we see Heli, Mark, and Dylan start to just freak out at Milchick about what just happened with Irv. But he retorts and tells them all that Helena was conducting valuable research. That's why she was down here, tells that story I was talking about, the Grax Chupon. And he's like, Kier Egan even did this in the factories. And Helena was doing the same thing, but we know that's not the truth. Helena was really down there spying. That's why Mark's even calling out the BS. And you quickly start to feel for Heliar fast in this episode. She's like, she doesn't have the right to take my identity. And the great acting by Tramell Tillman here with Milchick is that you see through this scene that he is feeling some remorse for them. He's feeling feelings for their innies, which he's not supposed to. And that's why it's so important. They highlight in his relationship with Miss Wong is that Miss Wong is a lot like Harmony Cobell was in that office with him, where he got rid of Harmony Cobell. He's put these kindness reforms. He's been a little easier of a boss than Harmony Cobell. But Miss Wong is like a mini-me out of Miss Cobell and is more old school and more harsh in the way she talks about things. And this is what his year-end review will be all about, which we will get to. And that part I'm talking about of sadness he has is when he confirms to them Irv is not coming back. And that we know there was something about Milchick where he did respect Irv a little more than the others, because Irv had that kind of quality of really embracing the Kier lore and company. And then he's able to put his mask back on Milchick and say, this went well. And the workstation is now a tri-station, which they're pissed about. I thought we were actually going to see one of the workers from early in season 2 in that 4 group be in this. But I was surprised they did the try thing, but it makes sense. They don't want to risk even shaking this group up anymore. And when Dylan finds a group photo without Irving, it reminded me a lot of Back to the Future. That effect of someone disappearing from a photo you're used to with everyone in it. And you see, Milchick says to Dylan at one point, careful, Dylan. Words have consequences. I'd hate to rescind certain privileges. And Mark does peek at Dylan when he says this. So notices that and takes note of it. And Dylan puts a little guilty face on. So that's going to be important. That is definitely going to come back later in this season to bite Dylan in the butt when they find that out. That he's been keeping that from them. Because Dylan's been the one to call everybody out this season. So it's going to look real hypocritical. And that's important, too, that the show's reminding you things that Milchick has hanging over each character and what would keep them from fully rebelling or doing the right thing. And that will come to Mark later when he confronts Mark in the elevator and reminds Mark, he's like, oh yeah, you know, did you tell any Heli that you screwed her Outie form? So that's also what he has hanging on any Mark. Now Dylan wants a funeral for Irv, not a retirement party like we saw for Britt, and Mark wants it quick. Now any Mark is acting wild this episode. He was devastated by what really happened last episode, the reveal of Helena. He's dealing with losing Irv and being raped by Helena and being totally deceived. And I also think that Outie Mark's nature is slipping in to him a little bit, or it's just because Outie Mark would naturally react as his Outie would when he is in a bad state of mind. He is acting so much like Outie Mark down here in his sass, his sarcasm, his attitude, his complete pessimism. And you could say that it's slipping in a little too from the reintegration because we see the coughings going both ways too. Like, that's confirming this reintegration is moving forward more and more, that he's getting sick. And you constantly see in this episode Mark looking in mirrors. It reminds me too, just like Petey was doing that, which also scares you about what's going on with him with the reintegration. And I love how they shot this bathroom convo he had with Helly. You see that she is split into two mirrors, and this is exactly how Mark is seeing her right now. He doesn't even know how to judge her. Can he trust her? Is this really Heliar or is it Helena? But unfortunately, he's taking this frustration onto Heliar. And she's right. She's like, it's not my fault. My Outie hijacked me. So she's just trying to catch up to Heliar. She's been through so much, and she's missed a lot. And she even just wants to talk about what they saw in OTC, basically last year's finale, but he doesn't even want to go there right now. Now we get to see Miss Wong and Milchick are prepping the funeral. We see these face mugs, and it's interesting they have one for everybody, so everyone is expendable at some point. It's cool if you watch the opening credits again, you'll see that face mug of Irving there, Outie Mark drinks out of. It's a little foreshadowing. Now Wong says to Milchick, I thought bereavement events were for innies who die on the floor. So this confirms that that event didn't happen on this floor, but I do still think someone had posted on Reddit the map of the building, and there is an activity center in the corner. I do think it definitely, like I predicted, was still inside that whole retreat last episode, but it was somewhere else in the building. And it's also, again, reaffirming how I'm talking about how this Miss Wong is really this person keeping an eye on Milchick. And he says, that wasn't a question, that was an opinion. And she says, your first performance review is today, right? That was a question. And his response is so great. He says, already the refreshments. You focus on the mournful signage. I love that kind of just writing in the show, that even in a serious moment, you're just laughing at how they say things and the wording. But he will actually, in his own way, punish Miss Wong later on by having her not play the theremin during the funeral. He says, I think the theremin works best in moderation. You can play your piece for me later. That was his little dig back for her being snarky and talking to him that way. Now at the funeral, we see Irving B is like in Nintendo style on the screen. And we see, instead of years, it's their quarters of living. Quarter 870 to quarter 882. But I think that's the time we've seen. But I don't think that's fully Irv's story here. I think Irv has been there longer, like I said, that he's been reset. And that's why his Outie is talking about things like his innie is working on things and getting onto something, but I think he's actually not even aware his innie was reset at some point. And we see Irving's disturbing fruit head is bought in, and Outie Mark just wants to leave early. And this just reminds you so much of Outie Mark, just being cold and rude and selfish. But he says Irving is not dead, he is just not here. So it is in that mindset of Outie Mark too, where that's how he's thinking about Gemma, and that's reflected in the line Outie Mark will say when he's talking about his wife, that she's not dead, she's just not here. Now, Dylan will spill the beans that Miss Casey is his Outie's wife to Heliar. Thanks, Dylan. But you see how it reminds you what Heliar is like and how different her reaction is to this information than Helena, who was not that same reaction of wanting to help right away and do something good and help Miss Casey. That's the Heliar we know. But Mark, you see how broken he is. Like, they know everything we're doing because Helena told them, putting the blame on her, like a side swipe. And she's like, I'm me. And he's like, how do I know that? And she's like, you don't. You just have to trust me. And this reminds you of those scenes you kind of see in shows and movies about like trust in a relationship too. But it's a different sci-fi concept of that. Just trusting the person that they're actually the person they say they are. And I guess that happens in real life as well. And I love how they shot this scene because it's shot with the side of the wall blurring the back of Mark. And it just reminds me we're starting to lose Outie Mark because of this reintegration. That's, I think, a tragedy that's going to start happening now, and he's going to regret doing this, and that it's going to really hurt Heliar. It's a role reversal now. So instead of having Helena in there with Outie Mark, it's eventually going to become Heliar with Outie Mark. And Outie Mark kind of sucks. And I like that line they put in with Helly saying, not everything here is a lie. Really talking about their love. Now, Milchick, before his performance review, brings up the paintings to Natalie. This was insinuated when they looked at the paintings together that there was a common part of them that were very hurt by these paintings. So he wants to know how she felt when she received the paintings originally. He's like, we faced similar challenges, paintings giving complicated feelings, but she doesn't break at all here. But you know she agrees with him. And it gives you a false hope that, oh, maybe Milchick's converting and we'll get Natalie too. But that's going to be ripped apart in this performance review. And I love that Drummond's like, we'll take a lunch if this is going to take over 4 hours. And then he hands him the lunch menu, meaning like it's definitely going to take over 4 hours. He says there's 3 contentions reported anonymously, investigated, and confirmed. And I think they uses too many big words, and the paperclip issues were reported by Miss Wong. And the big one that they didn't even need to be reported was that the Mark S team project didn't work, but there was kindness reform. So I think that's a part that maybe they didn't even know about. And that was all Milchick. But you see, he says back to this, I'm not Harmony Bell, defending the kindness reforms, which is interesting to hear him say that out loud. And again, how he looks at her as a more old school, tougher boss, and he's not like that. And he's trying to find some kind of mercy to make them obey better. But you see, too, Ortbo was a total failure. And even in the booklet, you see another failure they had as a previous one was the card stolen by Dylan we saw from season 1. But he says to him, Mark S.'s completion of Cold Harbor will be considered as one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet. So it's going to be something where it's going to bring Miss Casey like fully back to a functioning human, but probably as like a Kier Egan clone, I'm guessing. But him saying to Milchick it will take place under your stewardship, and it's quite a legacy you leave, is what I think puts Milchick back into the zone, especially when he's like, treat them how they really are and go back to the basics. So it's that ego of Milchick that gets at him of like this glory he could have. He is a hard worker. He is someone who's highly motivated and obviously trying to move up the ladder. That part of him is going to suppress the part of him that's more empathetic towards the innies and actually towards himself with the paintings. So he kind of reverts here. It's also interesting, we see on Mark S.'s computer, when he logs in all the other folders, they have all these different cities that are there, like Astoria, and him clicking Cold Harbor. Pretty crazy. But you see Mark is confronting the elevator by Milchick, and Mark is doing his classic kind of outie thing with a sarcasm to Milchick, but Milchick really gets in his face here, and it's him really putting his foot down and asserting himself as the alpha male down there and not Mark. And it's crazy, when Outie Mark leaves for the day, he also coughs like his innie. But you see, from the back of her head, you see Helena is watching him at the end of her day when she comes out of the elevator from afar because she's getting feelings for Mark. Now, Dylan looks at the hang in there poster and the Irving head and connects the dots that when Irving said hang in there to Dylan, it obviously was inspirational, but had the other meaning about look at that poster, because he left the export hall directions that Felicia gave him. It's also insane directions. If you read it real quick, it's like left, right. It's like so complicated, that building and the hallways. So that's going to be a big thing about them finding the export hall and Dylan now having to take that on now that they've lost Irv and do it in his honor. Now we see Devin is reading Rickon's words being turned into a little opposite of what he's saying. So this is a character who had all these things that inspired the innies that were right to get them out of Lumen, and now he's basically sold himself to the devil for the money and the glory, and they're just turning his kind of writing into something that would keep the severed workers in line. And I love when Devin calls him out for that. He's like, I will reflect on your words. But he then says, this is a fiscal and creative opportunity like any other I have yet seen. And he's trying to call out Dylan because he's like, has selling millions of my book lost its appeal to you? So she's obviously shown excitement to him before about that possibility of them being like really rich because of his book doing great. But this is obviously not how she wanted it to go. This is him selling his soul and doing it the wrong way because, like she's calling him out, you're hurting people too by doing this. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Rickon and Devin and how much she has to push Rickon against publishing this book in Lumen. And it's pinning now Rickon as someone who's going to get in the way of things. Now we also see Outie Irving with his paintings, and he seems like he's like packing them up. He's taking them off the walls. And this guy definitely has been reset before Severance Season 1. He's gone through this process as an innie. And you see he's talking to someone on the phone. He says, they fired me. I think they know what my innie was up to. But I think he's talking about something he had already started with that export hall early on before we saw him in Season 1. And I think he's calling maybe Ragabi, but someone also he might have not met yet. Now, Outie Bert is watching him, and Irv's going to confront him now. But Bert's like, I want to know why a guy shows up to my door screaming at my doorstep, and Irv responds, you're with Lumen, and he doesn't answer. So yes, Bert's definitely with Lumen, but Bert reveals he was fired for a relationship. So we're learning that because he didn't retire. So they made it seem like in that video he sent to himself that it was like a mutual thing, but he really was let go. And he's connected the dots that they were an item because of this and wants to meet up and talk about it all. He's like, we like red wine, expensive, talking about him and his husband Fields. And it's interesting saying that expensive part of it, again, I think confirms he works at Lumen because he's probably someone who makes a lot of money. It's really risky though for Irv. It seems like he's going to go, but do you trust this Outie Bert? Is he like the Innie Bert? I don't know. And like, if he works for Lumen, is he willing to kind of see the bad stuff they're doing and call it out, or is he part of it? You know, it's going to be interesting meeting Outie Bert and what his deal is. Now, Ragabi's going through Gemma's things, and she finds this necklace, and you'll also see they kind of distract you with him having what he thought were her remains, and now we're learning it's someone else's remains. But he actually takes a moment to look in that box and look at that necklace. And he has a very, very affected face by it, Mark. So there's something more to the story about that necklace, too. Besides it just being maybe Gemma's necklace and being, you know, a remembrance part she's talking about. There's something else that went on with that necklace in the story, I think, of Outie Mark and Gemma, because we don't know really anything about their relationship. So I think that's going to be explored too. Now, Argabi says one more day till they keep up doing the process because he's getting eager. And he asks her also, are they hurting her, talking about Gemma? And she says, I don't know. Now, when he starts walking away, he's getting what he's been asking for, remembering more things from his innie. And he starts hearing the Miss Casey wellness check narration. And he also starts experiencing through the innie's memories, walking through the hallways of the severed floor. Turns around to face Miss Casey, who is his wife, Gemma, to the Outie. And Adam Scott's facial acting here was incredible, especially as his Outie version. Seeing his wife in that form and her alive. Unbelievable. And maybe one of my favorite visuals to end an episode of the show. This episode, to me, was also incredible like last one, but in different ways. I think this is one that's going to be slept on, but I'm giving it a 9.5 because they gave us a lot of subtle information. They developed a lot of different relationships kind of progressing in a certain way in very interesting ways. And like I said, that visual aspect of it with his face at the end and going to that North Star I was talking about, Ben Stiller was talking about with Mark's character and the tragedy of this Outie who is going through so much grief, and the decisions he's makes through this whole show have been questionable. And I think that continues here and how he's going to handle even processing all of this and what's going on in Lumen. So let me know what you thought of it down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button. It helps in so many ways. It's a very competitive show, so if you can share it, talk about it even on the Reddit would be cool. Anything that can help me with views and subs would be amazing. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.